Hey, coaches, welcome to our latest Football Scoop Online Clinic, where today joining us, we have Villanova head strength and conditioning coach Michael Tucker, who's going to share ideas with us on modeling practice around the central nervous system for improved health and team speed. So, Coach Tucker, the floor is yours.
Coach, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. So I'll be talking about designing a summer speed program utilizing the high-low central nervous system model. If anybody has any questions at all regarding this or just wants to get in contact with me to talk shop or exchange ideas, my email is right down here, michael.tucker@villanova.edu. So if anybody wants to reach out, feel free. So let's get going here. I'm going to talk about the outline real quick. Why we should sprint, pretty much the high-low CNS model, what some weekly layouts look like, global load management. I'm going to touch upon energy system development briefly because I think it's wildly important for us as performance coaches and staff coaches and coaches on staffs to be aligned in that regard. And then I'm going to give you some insight into our summer programs and kind of discuss that. So why do we sprint, right? And everybody's run before, but not everybody's sprint before. And I think there's a big difference. We want faster, more explosive athletes, right? If I tell anybody out there, hey, let's get your guys faster, you will not hesitate, right? You want that. Okay, we're going to enhance overall athleticism. Sprinting is, from a motor unit recruitment standpoint, from a stimulus, from an intensity standpoint, from a coordination and sports specificity standpoint, the most demanding thing on your body. It's utilizing every single bit and fiber within there. And I think that is the key reason that it's such a high neural stimulus. Reduce the risk of injury. So I've talked to some coaches previously, and right, this is the most sports specific you can get. Unless you're a water creature, you're on the court or on the field, you're sprinting. And reduce the risk of injury. You want to expose these athletes to the demands that they're going to face. So if you don't sprint in the off season, then the first time they truly hit a 95 to 100% effort is on a fade ball week 3. We got a problem. Okay. A couple quotes down here I always liked. You don't build a Ferrari to stay in the first 3 gears, right? We want them to go, go, go. And that requires a lot of rest. So I'll kind of get into that as well. And this is from Charlie Francis, right? This is kind of paraphrased, but does it matter how many times you can jump if you can only touch the net, right? It doesn't matter how many times and how in shape you are if you can only touch the net, right? You're not getting any rebounds. Okay. And then the first things that coaches will always say, right? But coach, we get faster in the weight room. Right? Everybody squatting. The weight room is such a cultural thing. And I'm the strength coach telling you, that may not be the case. Here's just a reference in the force velocity curve. You have your max strength up here and your max velocity down here. And in reality, we spend, I think, as a culture of football and performance, we spend a lot of time and emphasis towards the top end of this force curve, right? With the heavy squats, right? The cleans and stuff like that. And in reality, even if you are moving a speed squat or an Olympic lift relatively fast, you're still not coming near the types of velocities and the speed that you are when you're truly sprinting. And then another thing that coaches will say, right, when we talk about sprinting, you can't teach speed, right? I will say that I think there is a genetic ceiling for some people like Usain Bolt and Tyson Gay, right? But you can always improve upon it. So here's 2 of the fastest guys in the world, right, in the history of the world. And we see like Usain Bolt, 10:03 to 9:58 in 2 years, right? Tyson Gay from a 10:27 to a 9:69. See it in the 200 immensely, right? Almost 2 full seconds. So the question I pose is if the top 0.001% can get it done, why can't we? Increasing the speed reserve. This is taken from Derek Hansen. So increasing your max speed essentially increases your range for sub-max running. So if I have a guy who runs 10.9 meters per second and I get him to an 11.8 meters per second max V, all right, look at the difference in how his 80% looks. Okay. So this is kind of what I said about, like, if you can't touch the net, it doesn't really matter. If you run a 10.9, right, and you focus on conditioning all the time and you operate at 80% at an 8.7, and I focus on speed development and I get them to an 11.8, my 80% is better than your 80%. So my 90% is right around your 100% there, right? So 11.8 to 10.9. So that kind of speaks volumes on how much your sub-max running is improved based on that max running, right? That's that increased ceiling, right? The less fatigue model, right? If you're sitting at 80%, we're both sitting at 80%, I'm still faster and I'm faster at I might be faster at 70 than you are at 80. So that's kind of the fitness illusion, right? We need to get in more shape. You hear that a lot with the Olympic sports side, like the soccers of the world. We need to get in more shape, but in reality, I think what we need is a little more dose of speed work. This is from Ken Clark. Almost a lot of my slides here, I'll have charts from other people, and I'll obviously mention them. But how max velocity affects the acceleration profile. So if you see in purple here, the top speed is 10 meters per second. This is taken from maybe the 2016 NFL Combine, maybe 17. So at 40 yards, right, his top speed in purple is at 10. Okay, and at 40 yards, the guy at top speed is in blue. Okay, well, linemen never run 40 yards, right? But in reality, it affects the entire curve. Okay, so the guy at 20 meters is at 3.1, right, when in purple versus 3.2 in blue. So affecting your top end speed will obviously increase your acceleration from 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, all through. So it doesn't apply to just skill guys. And then I have a note here, max output versus operational output, right? So if you increase the max output, right, without any extra stimuli around, excuse me, if you increase the max output without any extra stimuli, right, in a controlled environment, in shorts, right, with lasers out, if you can increase the speed there, you're not obviously going to run that same 20-meter split with pads on, right, or against the DB, okay? But it'll increase your operational output on game day as well. Does everybody need to sprint? So here's some stats via Tony Holler. He wrote an article. This is last year's draft, not the current one with Joe Burrow. This is the year prior's draft. So there were 6 O linemen drafted in the first round, and 5 of those O linemen had the fastest 40s in the top 7, right? So I think that speaks volumes of the quality of athletes that are getting drafted, right? They had the best 40 times, and here they are, right? So obviously you got the powerhouse of the Alabama, and these guys are all obviously awesome talents, like great athletes, but their 40 times is really what's telling, okay? And you have some, right, Alabama State, Washington State, NC State. You have not the all SECs of the world. You have a diverse group here, but the common denominator is speed. So that's essentially some of the points on why I believe we should sprint. I'm going to go into the high-low model now. Okay, so the determinants of the high-low would be motor unit recruitment, axial loading, and speed of movement. And ultimately, the central nervous system is the ultimate governor of what we do. The brain and spinal cord are sending the signals and receiving signals to the entire body. So stress is stress. We have to remember that these 3 are some of the most of the determining factors when it comes to physical preparation. But that doesn't take into the psychological, emotional, or any other stressors as well, which I'll get into later. Here's a motor unit recruitment chart from Charlie Francis. Okay, so you have your 100% of the total motor unit recruitments in your body, motor unit recruitment in the body, right? And that's your Olympic lifts, your clean and jerk, the snatch, the clean, the max sprints, right? The explosive med balls, the plyo jumps. And we see the lower you get on the chart, the less motor unit recruitments that are involved, right? Military press, seated row, right? Like a bicep curl and dumbbell row down here, the isolated supplemental stuff. So the less motor unit recruitments that an exercise offers, the more often it tends to be on the low CNS side. Okay, so all this stuff here, the sprints, the med balls, the jumps, the ollies, right? The major movements, you see those on the higher end from a motor unit recruitment standpoint. So that would categorize it as a high CNS drill. Okay, and here's running velocities. Again, something taken from Charlie Francis. So essentially, we want to spend the majority of our time running at 95 to 100% of our best time. And that's not an effort thing. That is a intensity deal. So gassers back and forth, with limited rest, it is not a 100% intensity rep. So we spend the majority of our time, right, avoiding this middle intensity zone. Okay, the middle intensity zone is not specific to our goal as sports or sport coaches or performance coaches. Okay, it's too high to recover from, and it's too low to be specific. Right, the low intensity down here is 75% or lower. That is what's going to prime us for those high CNS days. Okay, so essentially game day is where you live up here, right? And we talked about operational output versus max output. Okay, but you see, and the recovery's down here, and I'll go into the alactic and aerobic system in a little. But I think as a society, we live here, unfortunately, and running these types of drills doesn't really translate too well, in my opinion. So again, the high CNS days, right, will tax the entire organism. You're going to try to increase the alactic output and improve those top end qualities. Get faster, get stronger, get more explosive, get more powerful, right? And while the low CNS days essentially are going to prepare you for those quote unquote money days, right? If I have high CNS days that I'm like, hey, these are the days where we're going to improve our top end qualities. Like I have to make sure we're in an optimum state to perform on those days. Okay. So I want to increase the blood flow on low CNS days, right? Do some recovery circuits, maybe some extensive field work, some tempos. And I want to ultimately prime the body for that high CNS work. Okay. And the structural layout is we alternate between high and low intensity training days, right? Because the high days you need essentially from a neural component, 48 to 72 hours to recover from, not a peripheral muscle fatigue component, but from a neural component. So here's like some examples, right? Right. I kind of already touched upon a bunch of this. I put an asterisk next to Olympic lifts because I just wanted to mention, I think coaches get into heated arguments about, oh, well, we clean, you're an idiot if you don't. And we don't clean and you're an idiot if you do. Don't get married to an exercise, right? What adaptation are you trying to elicit from the Olympic lifts? Is it rate of force development? Is it powers? Like, what is it? And then is there another way to do it? Like if that's your way to solve that problem and get that adaptation, great for whoever's program that is. If you don't, can you get another way? I believe you can. But don't get married to an exercise, chase adaptation. And ultimately exercise selection, volume, intensity all play a role in determining if an exercise is high or low CNS classification. So let's look at a non-CNS training layout, right? This would be a linear Monday, lateral Tuesday, linear Thursday, lateral Friday. Okay. And this is done all over the country. I've done this layout before in the past prior to, kind of switching to more central nervous system model. It makes sense if you're thinking directionally, right? But we kind of touched on the brain and spinal cord sending the signals to the body, and the brain interprets that all as stress. So a 20-yard A-cell sprint and a 5-10-5, right? It's stressful to the system, right? The athlete's still one organism. So it can't really tell the difference. I mean, there's some more deceleration. So you might have, some more eccentric overload on some joints, in the 5-10-5, but essentially it's stress. Okay. So stress is holistic, like we mentioned. And then what if we trained high every day, right? You have these 4 training days in a row, 4 high days. You essentially get more high training days. So that could be considered good, right? But are you primed for those money days? Are you primed to perform, not to physically do them, but perform and execute properly so you're able to increase those top end qualities, right? Putting the body in an optimum state with the low days. And then ultimately risk injury, right? We want guys to feel good on those money days so they can hit a new PR in their flying 10, right? We want them to do those things and ultimately they have to be in an optimum state in order to do that. So let's look at a CNS, like one option, right? So here's something very generic, very general that, is one way we'll lay it out, right? So we'll do a low CNS day on Monday, after a Saturday, Sunday, where they're essentially off for 48 hours. People will argue that, we do our max velocity day that day because that's when they're freshest. I'd argue that you need some muscle tension, some muscle tone in there in order to prime yourself to hit that high flying 10, to hit that money day. And who knows what they're doing on Saturday and Sunday as well, right? We don't want them to come in a less than optimum state and waste a high day on that. So we want to prep them with a low day. A high day would be A-cell, med ball throws, change direction, something like that, right? All of our explosive stuff on those high days, right? Wednesday off for recovery, working on recovery modalities. Thursday would be, aerobic capacity, maybe some extensive field work. Friday, your max V, your elastic jumps, and maybe some change of direction. So this is just one layout. And there's another quote by Tony Holler, right? Don't let tomorrow be ruined by today. So whatever you're doing on today, don't let tomorrow be ruined by it. So that's like kind of the mantra on like a Thursday, right? Oh, we got to do X, Y, and Z. Well, if this is the money day and this is the day that really matters in increasing those top end alactic outputs, like don't allow Thursday to ruin Friday. And so here's another sample layout, right? So say A-cell Monday, med ball throws and change direction. Maybe that's a primer, quote unquote, for this max velocity Wednesday, right? I kind of just said that you don't really want a high day 48 hours out, but with the short yardage, the short volume, like this is a way you can maybe steal some extra development here with what kind of quality high CNS work you're doing here. Then Wednesday, you got your elastic top end speed stuff. And then Friday, maybe a work capacity, ACL, change direction, transverse dominant day. So this is kind of 2 samples of a layout, and I can answer questions about what we do and things like that. But initially, when you look at that blank sheet of paper when you're designing this summer speed program, right? Where are you? Where do you need to go? Right? I think those are the 2 biggest things. Coaches will get a program via the internet or a coaching friend in the profession, and the first thing is, we got this from blank, so we're going to do it. And it's like, well, maybe they're national champs and they have, elite 22-year-olds running their program, and, you're at a high school and it's a little different, right? So I think that these are the 2 most important questions, like, where are you? Where do you need to go, right? Who are you? Who is your team? What do you value? And where do they ultimately need to get to? Are you a ground and pound team that your total yardage in a game is a lot less than maybe a spread team? Okay. So ultimately, are you preparing them properly? And then ultimately look at the sport demands and position demands, right? Ultimately look at the sport demands and position demands, right? O-line and DB, as much as you don't want to admit it, are different sports. An O-lineman has to get really good at pushing somebody 5 yards, and a DB has to get really good at backpedaling 20, turning, flipping his hips, and running 20, right? Those are different sports, and I think they need to be trained differently. And some people don't believe in sport specificity, but I do. And it's just preparing the athlete for what they're going to face. So here is a vertical integration model. Ultimately, this is saying is we utilize all types of training year round. Okay. So if you look here on the left, right, EMS, we don't need to worry about that, right? Strength, explosive jumps, hops, skips, speed work, tempo work, core work. Okay. At all times of year, all of these are present. Okay. And all will fluctuate as the volume. So if you look here, we'll say, look, he's got 240 contacts a week, right? And then maybe here he's got 200 foot contacts a week. We'll look at the speed work volume here, right? He's probably a little less than 2,000 meters a week here when he's up higher, right? And when he gets higher in the speed work, he'll fluctuate down on the explosive jumps series. So we fluctuate the volume, not the intensity of our work. And there's a myriad of examples and reasons why we do that, which I can get into at another time. But this is ultimately what we follow. One thing I think is important is understanding that this fluctuates throughout the year, and as well as, right, we don't peak everything at the same time. I just recently heard a coach discuss, hey, we want to consolidate workload, and week 3 is a peak week and they have everything peaking week 3. Well, something's got to give, right? We talked about stress being holistic. Something's got to give. So you can't be good at 10 different things at once. You got to put some things on the back burner. But all things remain present at all times, just the volume alters. Okay, so looking at this force velocity curve again, right? The sport demands and position demands, just touching upon where we think the sport is played, right? I think it's played a lot more down here than people give it credit for. And obviously you have your inside the box, right? And then you have your line, your mid skill and your skill, right? They might fall into different places on here. But max strength is time independent, right? Time is irrelevant in a powerlifting competition. It just matters about getting the weight up. And time is a crucial factor in creating space for our athletes, as well as mitigating space. So if you're on offense, right, you're a skill guy, you want to create space. On defense, you want to mitigate the space. So I think that the necessary component is time. So I think that's why we spend so much time more down here when you look at the sport. And ultimately our goal is to shift the whole curve, right? We don't want to be lopsided up here at the force side or lopsided down here at the velocity side. We want the whole curve to move. But how do we go about doing that? Global load management is some kind of James Smith really opened my eyes to, right? The demands of practice, speed, lift, conditioning, rehab, school, social life, home life. The stress is holistic, right? The athlete is still one organism. I kind of talked about stress anywhere leads to stress everywhere. Like there's only so much water in the cup and you can't overfill it, right? So that kind of goes back to the vertical integration theory. I think Zach DeCamp might have mentioned that on social media recently. There's only so much water in the cup. You can't fill it up with 10 different things and be peaking all at once. So something's got to give if you are, and it normally results in injury or a lack of performance. So you got to consider the cumulative load on an athlete. And I think that's something that as performance coaches and sport coaches, we need to be more wary of and more aware of. So energy system training, I'll keep this brief. So conditioning is to bring something into a desired state of use, right? And then football conditioning is to develop the body's energy pathways used in the sport of football, right, to the capacity used throughout the game. Okay. I'm not breaking any like news lines with those two statements. Right. So ultimately the question that we have to ask is this, right? When we look at training, practice, and the game, right? Does each preceding stimuli in succession optimally prepare the athlete for the demands of the following? So does your training prepare you for practice, and does your practice prepare you for games? Okay. And ultimately, right, we have to work backwards to figure that out. What does a game look like? All right, how do I design practice in order to make sure I'm in quote unquote game shape, right? You see that all the time. Guys are, oh, we're not in, it takes a game or two to get into game shape. Well, does practice really emulate a game? And then does training prepare you for practice? Down here I have, you have to reverse engineer the sport to find out, right? That's kind of a bigger buzzword in the performance community right now. The first I kind of heard of it was really like Eric Corum, I know, posted on it. Kier, the guys over there, I think they're doing a great job, but ultimately it's preparing the athlete for the demands of the game. So you have to find out what the demands of the game are. So football is an alactic aerobic sport ultimately. So if you go back to that running velocity chart, it's at the high end and at the low end. It's not dealt with in moderate, right? So alactic power would be high intensity, short duration energy pathway, right? Okay. It's less than 10 seconds of max effort work, top end alactic output, top end ceiling money day, right? Okay. And your aerobic system, right, is a low intensity, long duration energy pathway, right? So this is obviously what's going to help you recover, things like that. So I think pointing these out is huge because you look at the game of football, right? Average duration of one play is 4 to 6, 5 to 6 seconds, right? Okay. And then like the play clock is what, 35, 40. So you look at the game and it depends on obviously who you play, right? I have North Dakota State here or Iowa, maybe they're in an eye and huddling up every play, right? You have 30 to 35 seconds rest versus maybe us or a more up-tempo spread team. You have a lot less time. So you have to obviously take that into effect, but understanding the game is truly an alactic aerobic sport is necessary. All energy systems are present and working at all times. I'll say that right now. So, right, it's a spectrum. So when you're fresh off the bench on a fresh drive, right, the offense just had an 8-play drive, and you come back on the field after 9-10 minutes, maybe we scored, and there was the special teams in there too. You're predominantly using the alactic pathway, right? And you're going to use less and less of it, right, as the series goes on. Okay. But the robustness of your aerobic system is going to enhance the recovery of that alactic system. Okay. So if we have a robust aerobic system and a high-end alactic and we have high-end alactic outputs, we're putting ourselves in a position to succeed. So let's break down college football, right? Real simple. 4 to 6 seconds. Okay. 6 plays per drive, 12 drives a game. Okay. So that comes out to 3 drives a quarter. Average time between plays is 25 seconds. So college football is 72 snaps of 12 6-play drives, right? So if we just found out that 6 plays, right? So you have a 5-second burst, right? 25 seconds rest, 5-second burst, 25 seconds rest. You had 6 times, okay? How does 5 300s prepare us for that, right? Or gassers or intensive 110s. So this is something I think we just need to evaluate as coaches, right? 300 yards is 25 and back 6 times. And 52, 58 seconds to do that? Well, how does that prepare you for 72 6-play drives or 72 snaps at 12 6-play drives, right? 53 yards and back, right, is 106 yards. Okay. How does that prepare you for a 25-second, right, break after a 4-second burst? And so I think we just need to evaluate what we're doing and if it truly makes sense. So looking here's right, a little more, in depth of some example of what we do, right? Here's our bigs in June, right? So some extensive hops, extensive med ball throws, grappling. We'll utilize grappling and body weight and aerobic strength circuits a lot with our bigs. We want to introduce them to contact early. So we're actually preparing them. So you think of the difference between a sport specific drill of, an up-tempo grappling session versus a gasser. You're preparing them for their sport a lot more specifically than you are running 100 yards. So on our ACL days, the theme of the day is push. So we'll do a strength dominant plyo in that same quad dominant plane. So think broad jump, right? We're thinking push on these days, right? A quad dominant med ball throw, and then change direction or agility. I'll kind of get into the difference on those two later on. Wednesday low day, Thursday, maybe some extensive indie. more grappling, aerobic strength circuit. And then Friday's a money day, right? Max velocity, right? An elastic, hammy dominant plyo, something where you're quick off the ground, right? And then a post chain dominant med ball throw. This is kind of the theme of the day, right? So we're trying to have the stressors be very similar because, you send mixed signals, you're going to get mixed results. I will say this, right? Our bigs don't run on the low days. They don't run nearly as many aerobic yards as the skilly, but they also don't run the same volume on the max V or the ACell, right? We understand that they're 300-pound, they're big boys, and we need to adjust accordingly. But the emphasis is still there for speed development, right? In July, we switched to a three high day model because we're getting closer and closer to camp. So again, the themes are very similar. You see a lot more agility now instead of change direction. I'll get into how we progress that later on. From a general rule of thumb, I think I stole this from Lima. 80% to 20% grappling to extensive aerobic work for our bigs versus our skilly will be 20 to 80 grappling, which I thought that was a really good layout for it. So skilly, similar layout, right? We'll do multi-directional tempos, right? So we'll do, shuffle tempos, crossover run tempos. We'll do back pedal tempos. We'll put them in all the different joint angles, right? And different force cuts that they're going to see in the game, right? Sean Doherty brought over some great stuff that we'll do game simulators, right? Some extensive field work, but putting them in positions that they're going to see very similar to the field, I think is awesome. And he's done a great job with that with our guys. You see a little less grappling with our skills. And like I kind of mentioned, a little more max V ACell yardage. So the big difference here is, right, the themes are the same. We don't, throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? It's different positions, right? So we have to train them differently, but the themes are the same, right? We have our money days, we have our low days, right? On our low days, we're doing a lot more multi-directional stuff. Like I mentioned, some more extensive indie. Now that we're in July, we'll do more small-sided games with skilly, the 7-on-7s of the world, and more agility work. So I'll get into the COD versus agility later, but ultimately the first time we want to take them through the observe, orient, the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, direct, act. I think that the first time we take them through that shouldn't be August 2nd, right? We need to expose them to those open field environments so they can go through that loop and learn how to make it proficient early on. So just some themes I could go over, right? I can give you our whole program, right? But I think the themes are more important. So health over everything, right? The best ability is availability. Rest, and more rest for speed development. I think that this is huge when it comes to speed, because you'll ask coaches, why are you running 1040s, right? Oh, for speed. And it's like, okay, well, what's the rest? Oh, it's 30 seconds or a minute or a jog back. It's like, well, that's not speed, that's conditioning. So a general rule of thumb that's really good and coaches have had success with is 1 minute for 10 yards. So if you're running 30s, it's a 3-minute rest. And coaches get antsy, right? Myself included, I've had times where I get antsy, but ultimately that's what you need in order to have that true top end effort and intensity quality. So how you organize and structure your workouts is huge, so guys don't feel like they're wasting time. Minimum effective dose, right? Usain Bolt doesn't run 2100s, and on the 20th one he sets a PR. Like hit what you need, right, and then get out. You do a lot more harm than good, and sometimes less is more when it comes to speed development. Vary the stimulus, law of accommodation, right? The body will adapt to what you place on it. So you ultimately need to change the stimulus in order to keep providing context and to keep providing adaptation. And competition, right? Everybody wants to be the fastest dude on the team. Everybody wants to be the strongest dude on the team too. So we try and foster competitive atmospheres in everything we do. And that's been huge for our guys, right? I know Tony Holler does a rank, record, publish. I think that's awesome. And we're able to, get guys racing each other or put them on video and stuff like that. And that seems to drive up some excitement. Volume, right? 10% increments, seamless transitions, right? Week 1, we're doing, two 30s as our top end max velocity work. Great. The next week, you shouldn't be doing 6. Okay. Right. You should never be trying to, it should be seamless transition from training to practice to game. And that's why I think that the training to practice model, you see guys, right? We go from an NCAA kind of like that. The model goes from 8 hours to 20, right? And granted, all 20 aren't physical, but like we said, stress is holistic. It needs to be seamless transitions. So just as a general rule of thumb, just like the weight room, you wouldn't go to a 70% squat to a 95, right? Try and make it seamless transitions to even a 5 to 10% increment. And then obviously having the days where maybe you don't push as hard, or the weeks where you obviously deload a little bit. Specificity demands the position. I kind of already touched on that. We train each position differently because the demands of the game are different, right? They cover different distances, different joint angles, different volume of yardage. So I think that's huge in that regard. Reactivity, no cone drills. As we get closer and closer to the season, right, we do a lot of agility emphasis. So I think I have a slide coming up in like 2 or 3 on that. Speed of movement. As coaches, we are educators, and whether we like it or not, like if 30 dudes don't know how to change direction on your team, then we're not teaching it well. If 30 dudes don't know how to sprint on your team, then we're not teaching it well, right? So guys will throw a new play or a new drill at them and be like, okay, here we go. And do they even know how to, like, what position you want them in to start, right? Like, let's take it back to the learning and education process. There's so much going on that they need to slow everything down, right? Teach it, execute, and then dominate it, right? Then add the stress, then add the stressors to it, then add the competition. But I think we're a little, I think we jump into the competitive up-tempo fatigue state a little quick, and then that obviously is an optimal learning environment. Then a fluid program, right? So you draw up the perfect program on paper, and week 4 you have 6 hamstrings. Well, something's probably wrong, right? So just understanding that what you put on paper is a blueprint, and hopefully they're and you could have say, hey, oh man, they're adapting a lot better than I thought. Maybe we can push it next week, or like, hey, we have 6 hamstrings, like we got to back off. So the first thing you always get is with these oh, we're gonna go sprint, and then day 1 post quarantine you run a bunch of 40s and nobody's done anything. So I think meeting the kids where they are is huge. So here's what I'm talking about, the change direction versus agility. We ultimately utilize cone drills or instructional change direction as structural and tissue damage. I think it's necessary from that regard. I think some people don't do any of it altogether, and I think that might lean a little too much toward agility, and I think some people just do a lot of line drills and cone drills, and it leans a much in on that spectrum towards change direction too much. So we utilize change direction for structural and tissue demand, and then we emphasize it, progress it, and ultimately put them in that agility environment. I think Kier touched upon this the other day, is like, I think he used a different analogy, right? But we always talk about increasing the toolbox, right? You have 50 tools in the toolbox. We want to get it to 60 tools. We want to get to 70 tools. If you're a coach who is, say you're a linebacker coach, right? This is the example I always use. You're a linebacker coach and you have everyday linebacker drills, right? And it's like 3 different shuffle drills, but it's the same 3 different shuffle drills every day. The brain now has 3 solutions to the problem of shuffling in a game. So once they are proficient at those 3 drills, move on, stress them differently to increase the tools in their toolbox. Okay. Because the brain needs to pull those tools out in a game to solve solutions, like we talked about with the observe, orient, decide, act loop, which is consistent. Okay. The decision-making process is a continual loop, right? And they're always going to draw on the toolbox. So if you're a linebacker coach and you have 3 everyday drills, we're going to get really good at technique and being great at the fundamentals. That's great, right? Fundamentals are awesome. Okay. But now you've limited your solutions to 3 solutions. And I think that's a big issue. So that's kind of why we do a lot of small-sided games in our agility, right? A lot of open field scenarios. So like one example would be towel tag, which you've seen. Like that's a very basic scenario. Another scenario is just open field tackling, right? If you're a safety and the first time you kind of get into a and like we don't bring them to the ground, right? But if you're a safety and the first time you are exposed to an open field like tag off drill is camp, like you're not like, what do you have, 3.5 weeks till game 1? That's not an optimal learning environment, right? It's up tempo, your pads on, like, hey, let's increase that performance capability right now in June and July. So I think that's huge for us. Then just a note on like acceleration versus max V, right? We go short to long, right? Our bigs don't start off running 25, 30-yard max velocity fly-ins on day 1, right? We want to prep the hamstring to sprint. So we'll toe. I know JB Marin and Ken Clark have like a ton of research on this. We'll toe, less than 10% of a speed decrease in weight. So generally that's like a 20-pound chain for a 200-pound guy, something like that. But that'll decelerate them enough, but they're still being exposed to the upright nature of sprinting versus that angled acceleration nature. Competition variation. So again, like prepping the body for sport, and like you can, and this is something that I've been guilty of in the past, right? Doing a ton of chain sprints, a ton of fly-ins, ton of fast, easy, fast, in and outs. And then, okay, well, if you're on punt and you're running down 30 yards and it's a curved run and you're against contact and then you got to cut twice, we're missing something, right? We got to bridge that gap. So I think, making a competitive environment and adding more game-like scenarios, I think is huge. So that's kind of what I just touched on. We don't, not just linear in that regard, but some curve sprints, some flying, right? You want them to adjust in space. You want them to be at top end speed, at different angles, right? To prep the lower body and total organism, right? For the training. So the training prepares them for practice and the practice prepares them for the game. So again, here's the chart from earlier, right? The running intensity. Okay. We want to stay away from the middle. Right. If the game is played up here, right, from a operational output, and recovery is based down here, this middle zone, right? And this is popularized. Gassers, 300s, Matrils, and 110s. This is what's popular right now at all levels. There's a lot of guys at multiple levels doing this stuff. And it's almost a disservice when you analyze the game and what you're truly preparing them for, in my opinion, and you can say culture and all that stuff all you want, but can we build culture like by holding guys accountable or or another way, right? I don't think that building culture is designed around one drill. So ultimately, right, we want to chase adaptation, not fatigue. Being tired does not equal like positive, influential training, right? And I forget who said this to me, but like I can make you tired with a fly swatter, right? Like there are so many ways that you can get somebody tired, but what adaptation are you looking for? Kind of like I touched upon with the Olympic lifts. What adaptation are you looking for? How are you going to elicit that adaptation? I think that's huge when it comes to performance training. Like what are you preparing them for? Does it increase their qualities? And analyze it, right? Us as coaches, we got to analyze our programs and see and have measurable data and see what we're doing is actually working. And then I think this is from Lou Caralla, right? The SAID principles. Now, there's a specific adaptation to impose demands, right? Somebody way smarter than me did this many, many years ago. But essentially, right, what demands you place on the body, you're going to adapt to, right? So specific adaptation of imposed demands. The demands you place on the body is what you're going to specifically adapt to. So the quote, be careful what you get good at, right? If you get really, really good at doing up, downs, and seat rolls, like in a fatigued state, you're going to operate at that level in a game. So this 76 to 94%, you can get really good at operating at 80%. And I think that's something that we got to be careful of as coaches. What are we training for? And be careful what you get good at. So again, why sprint? This is the exact same slide as before, just as a review. Right, we want faster, more explosive athletes. It's the most intense, demanding thing from a neural standpoint that the human body can do. Will reduce the risk of injury. And ultimately, like what it comes down to is, does it matter how many times you can touch the net if you can, or how many times you can jump if you only touch the net, right? Because you're still getting 0 rebounds. Like ultimately, that's what it is. If you're at 80%, right, you're still getting 0 rebounds. We need to get you jumping higher so you can at least get 1 rebound. And then let's worry about like getting in shape or however we do that, aerobically or alactic. But we got to get you getting some rebounds first. So fieldwork versus weight room, right? The athlete's one organism. So I think that goes back to the complete stressor model I talked about with global load management and James Smith. The phase and type of work should mirror each other. They should be complementary versus contrasting, right? So if you have a high CNS weight room day Monday and it's a deadlift or whatever we're doing, right? Tuesday is an ACell day. Do we think we're going to be at a max output? Is that, we did tempos and deadlift on Monday. The stress is holistic, right? So they're still not in an optimum state to perform on that Tuesday and Monday day. So it's definitely complementary versus contrasting. So you got to consolidate your high and low days in the weight room and on the field. And this is something I think is super important, right? The weight room supports the field work, not the other way around. I think this is huge when it comes to this because there's no squat rack at the 50-yard line, right? And coaches get, upset or feel some type of way when I say that. But I think that's told to me by one of my mentors, Jeff Oliver. But if we get them sprinting and doing things on the field well, the weight room, you can actually get stronger from the sprinting for the weight room. Like everybody says weight room increases speed. Well, speed can increase weights too. Right. And then whenever I give this talk, right, people will be like, oh, this guy's a like speed guy and we don't, lift heavy and all that stuff. But this is just kind of funny. We got like, we're still strong, right? We still lift. We do things like this all the time. Like we have a holistic model. I just think that as a society, as a coaching community, we utilize a little too much and we look for a little too much in the realm of weight room. So here's some influences and references. I mentioned almost all these guys' names in the presentation. This is where I start and pull from when talking to guys or looking up research, reading their books, things that these guys have done in the past are way smarter than me. I think that this is a great place for anybody to start if they're looking to get more in depth with some of this stuff. And lastly, just any questions, man. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I'm definitely like you all learning a lot during this time and trying to reach out to as many people as possible. But again, my email's down below as well as my Instagram, but I'm actually hosting a free webinar every Thursday at 4:00 Eastern time. So if you want to get added to that email list, shoot me an email. But again, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. I'm a big fan of Football Scoop and everything you guys are doing. So, what questions do you all have that I could hopefully, attend to?
Yep, I got a couple here, Mike. First of all, as a strength guy, what's your preferred method of caffeine intake?
Strictly coffee, black.
Coffee. And are you drinking? Are you a coffee snob, or are you? Drinking
no, I'll drink anything. Like, and don't get me wrong, you can definitely tell when it's a higher quality bean and all that good stuff, right? But sometimes it at 4:30 in the morning, you can't be picky.
Get some gas station coffee. There's nothing wrong with that. You drink it for the caffeine, not the taste. I'm in the same boat, man. What's your, I think for a lot of high school guys, and not that it's, at the cutting edge, but I think it's finally starting to trickle down to the high school level, is lifting on game day. What's your stance on that for especially high school guys?
Yeah, lifting on game day. Like I think that you've seen that on like ESPN, right? With guys on the barbells on the sideline. I think it depends. Like any answer, it depends, right? I've done game day lifts when I was at San Jose with baseball, when I was at San Jose State, and our guys loved it, right? A pitcher would have to go out and pitch at 4 p.m. and he's in the weight room doing some shoulder correctives and some explosive med ball throws to prime the system. So I think it obviously depends on what you're doing, right? If you're doing a full lift, I think you kind of run into some, again, keep the main thing the main thing. That's something I didn't mention during the talk that I definitely believe in, right? The main thing is to win the football game. Like, don't take away from that. So if you're going to do some explosive light stuff, great. But the adaptation piece is to turn the lights on in the house, and prime them for the game. Just do the minimum effective dose. So I've definitely looked into it at Villanova, but I've done it in the past. And it just obviously depends on dose and exercise selection and all that.
Yep. Gotcha. Something I heard a guy talk about at a clinic a while ago was how he incorporates grip training into his weight room stuff. Do you guys do some form of that as far as strengthening grip and hands and things like that?
It's funny you mentioned that because I actually just had a high school coach send me an email about his template, and he made sure he had forearm and grip in there twice a week. And my view on that is there's X amount of qualities we have to develop, right? And it depends on who you are in your program. Where does grip strength lie on that list? Is it third? So again, look at your layout and the importance that you place on your training. Like, where does grip lie on that training stimulus block, right? For us, sprinting's number one. Like, everything else is supplementary. That's the first thing I program. The second thing I program is all of our field work, right? Then the plyos and the med ball throws, and then I go into the weight room. All right. And from grip, like, we're lucky we have really thick, like, pull-up bars, right? So we kind of do we don't do certain isolatory, like, grip. Like, we don't really have guys in rice buckets. I'll put that on like a champion work an extra day. If guys want it, they like it sometimes, but they're generally doing some of that stuff on their own. And with NCAA limitations of 8 hours, I think it's tough to squeeze in. So we try and get it with like fat grips or a fat bar, or those fat grip pull-ups that we have. So we try and get it in during other exercises.
And I think that's important how you kind of said that a few times during the process here is, it depends on what you want in your program. It's, if you're a wing T team, grip strength might be a little more important than speed is. It just kind of depends on who you are and what you're looking for. So I'm glad you said that. The other thing was, and you mentioned it, the OODA loop, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of the next frontier is, especially for high school guys, is I call it like the VDA, the visualize, decide, and act, and how you train that. It's no longer sitting in a squat rack or on the bench for an hour. You've got to start to train that mental process. So what's that OODA stand for, if I'm saying that even right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's been popularized by Fergus Connolly a lot. So it's observe, right? Observe what's going on around you, orient. So now spatial awareness, you within that picture that you're observing, decide, okay, what's the best solution? What's the tool in the toolbox I'm going to use? And then act, right? And that loop is consistent, right? So it's not just a one-time deal. So like, as we get closer and closer, kind of like I mentioned, like the first time a DB sees that shouldn't be in August, right? Or a linebacker. So we try and put them in those situations in July to expose them to it, to get them proficient at it. Because you always see it. Guy runs a fast 40, has a fast 5.10.5, and then he has quote unquote stiff hips and can't get out of his cut, right? Well, maybe his decision making, right, is off. I think the four coactive model, right? We have physical, we have technical, tactical, physical, psychological. I think we say, oh, he's just not fast enough, or oh, he's just not strong enough, right? But in reality, there's so much more that goes into performance. So I think we just get pigeonholed sometime in that physical component. So the observe, orient, decide, act, that's something that I've come across like in the last 18 months, really, that I've really just been programming more and more. Because like you said, if you're on a bench, and then we got to look at who we are as performance coaches. Strength and conditioning. Okay. Does that mean bench pressing gassers? That's strength and conditioning, right? Like, so, but are we preparing them for sports? So I think it's just a shift in ideology a little more than anything.
Right.
But like you said, I think it's immensely important.
Yeah. I appreciate you taking the time to join us, Michael.
Coach, thank you so much. Thanks for having me again. If you guys want to reach out to me, my email is right at the bottom. Thanks, guys.